National African American Gun Association President Philip Smith criticizes the ATF shakeup, plus new video in the Alec Baldwin shooting. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
I made the devil run. I gave him poison just for fun. I had one.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also the founder of thereload.com, where you can head on over and check out our membership options today. If you want to support our sober, serious approach to firearms journalism, we are 100% reader-funded, independent publication that focuses on hard news reporting and analysis of the latest stories in guns throughout the country. And this podcast here, we like to have on experts and people who are directly affected by what's going on in the news, newsmakers, if you will. And so this week we have Philip Smith from the National African American Gun Association. Welcome. How are you doing today?
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to be back and can't wait to talk today. So,
yeah, absolutely. Can you give people just a little bit more background about yourself for anyone who is listening and might not have heard of you before?
Yeah, sure. Originally from California. I started the organization National African American Gun Association, otherwise known as NAAGA, back in 2015. We have grown to 45,000 members nationally. We have over 120 chapters. We have over 5,000 what we call nest groups, folks that are kind of preppers in case of emergencies, which is a really good thing, especially now. And we're just very, very proactive in the Second Amendment 2A community. So I'm very proud to lead the organization, and hopefully we can continue to grow and provide, our perspective on firearms and help out in this, this journey that we're on.
Certainly. So you're up to 45,000 now. That's
45,000. Yeah,
quite a lot of growth over the last 2 years, right?
Yeah, I mean, COVID really was, like I tell everyone, was a game changer for us. We were growing pretty steadily anyway, but it really pushed us. And really, we had the introduction of members, we call new members, that were typically kind of on the border. Previously, when it came to guns, they were kind of like, I don't know if I should have a gun, or they would even be anti-gun. But when COVID came into play, it really forced them to really take a serious look at their own safety, their own security. And a lot of those folks jumped over and joined our organization in the process of buying a gun. So I think that's a very good thing. Yeah, certainly. We did a whole podcast on that, really. The last episode that you were on, so people should definitely check out that conversation, because I think the growth of minority gun ownership in the United States is such a huge story overall to guns in America. And so we talked at length about that. But this episode, I want to talk about what's going on with the ATF, right? So there's a new nominee that President Biden has put up to attempt again to get a permanent nominee in that role. His previous one failed, David Chipman, and now he's nominated Stephen Dettelbach. But there's some concerns that your organization had with this process, and with as well the demotion of the acting director, which Correct.
Recently happened. Marvin Richardson, who's obviously African-American career ATF official, and he's been moved from acting director down to acting deputy director.
Yeah.
And you guys had concerns about that. Can you just tell us a little bit?
Sure. And for your audience, the thing is really troubling that you're looking at a career federal employee who has worked his way up from the ground level, being a field agent, all the way up to being director of the ATF. Not an easy maneuver for anyone, particularly an African American. He's avoided the landmines career wise, and has moved all the way up. Has been really received by all rank and file, based on what I've heard from secondary and other folks, that he's well liked. He's balanced. He's not biased in his perspective. He can work with ammo companies. He can work with gun manufacturers. He has a very balanced, like he should, approach to dealing with those folks that he's going to be interacting with. He's not a political appointee. He's a 30-year veteran of the ATF, and is well viewed by everyone. And we just feel it's troubling, very troubling, at a very core level, when you have an African American who symbolizes everything that we feel that this country represents. You work hard, you work yourself up by your bootstraps, no excuses, all the way to the highest level within the ATF. And now that just gets jerked away from you for no reason other than you want to place a political appointee, plain and simple, in that place to run the ATF I think in a very biased way to set up legislation and rules that are going to be somewhat anti-gun or very anti-gun. It's troubling on both those issues, racially, as well as the political aspect of it, really gutting this guy out and really taking away a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that he probably will not have again.
Right. So you're concerned both about the fact that he's been passed over twice for white nominees,
Correct.
and also that those nominees have a track record of supporting, stricter gun control.
Oh, absolutely.
Legislation.
Anti-gun. They are to me a wolf in sheep's clothing. They're anti-2A, they're anti-Second Amendment, and that is troubling in itself because that person is going to be over the ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. Why would you want to place somebody in that position? That would be truly a negative for the organization and make it very difficult for those folks who run gun companies and ammo companies and have other companies related to firearms. Why would you want to do that? And the only reason I can think, obviously I'm not in the White House or have anything, no dog in the fight, but to me, this basic observation, because you have an agenda, and that agenda is to push across a very anti environment for gun manufacturers. And I think that's very, very troubling.
Yeah, certainly the White House has touted Steve Dettelbach's career as a U.S. attorney before. He did eventually leave to go and run for attorney general in Ohio, but he did serve 20 years as U.S. attorney. They are putting him forth as somebody who can help fight the crime wave that we've seen, especially in major cities when it comes to the murder rates increasing. Do you feel that that's not really what they're trying to accomplish with his pick?
No, I think it's a veil for what they really are trying to do. I think they've got him in the position. They're going to push that agenda of him being an attorney general, but the real purpose of him is being there to really bottleneck the ATF as being an effective resource for gun manufacturers and ammo companies, plain and simple. Okay.
And then as far as the racial concerns go, you've seen two other African-American groups speak out about the ATF situation. One was Noble, which represents, professional law enforcement agents who are African-American, and they are supportive of Steve Dettelbach's nomination. They haven't spoken to the situation with Marvin Richardson, but they're supportive of his nomination. They want to see him confirmed. This is a group that's also worked, of course, closely with Everytown, the gun control agents group. What are your thoughts on their position? They want him confirmed.
I don't want to demonize any organization, particularly another African-American organization, and that's what Noble is.
Sure.
But I think their perspective is inherently wrong. I think it takes bold initiative and bold leadership to look at something and not just toe the line and say, you know what, we're not saying this guy is the evil incarnate, walking around the devil himself, but he truly is not the best fit at this time, especially when you have a qualified African-American male who knows his job. And I mean, he knows the job. I've heard this gentleman talk. He knows what he's doing at the highest level, very articulate, very smooth, very, very sophisticated on all the nuances of the position. So why would you want to take someone that's in that position after 30 years of hard work and gut him down and make him deputy director as opposed to director of the ATF? To me, it's a moment the country is missing. It's a feel-good moment that we could have to show folks, if you work hard, do the right thing, come to work every day, putting all you have out on the table, that you can rise to do anything that you want in your particular career path. He is a living example of that. Why would you want to take that away, particularly with an administration that touts diversity, particularly an administration that touts that we're looking at different folks doing really great things? He's the embodiment of that. So why would you want to take that away from him? I just don't understand it.
Okay. And so the other group that's spoken out as well is the Black Agents and Professionals Law Enforcement Association, which works directly with the ATF to help foster the careers of African-American agents. Now they've spoken out in support of Marvin Richardson after his demotion was announced. They didn't necessarily critique the move or the president or Steve Dettelbach's nomination or anything along those lines, but they did speak out. And here's a direct quote from them. The men and women of ATF have been fortunate to have Marvin, as he's affectionately known, as its acting director. He is a career employee and servant leader who has put the needs of the agency and country first and foremost. BAPLEA commends acting director Marvin Richardson for his exemplary leadership to the ATF and his extensive service to the United States of America. They were sort of voicing their continuing support for him. And so it seemed to be, obviously people can interpret it. They can read the full statement and interpret it the way they want, but it certainly seems that maybe there's some reading between the lines that's necessary there, they're not happy about what's happened.
Yeah, I think they're trying to do their very, very best of this really walking that thin line of, like you said, voicing their support, but at the same time not trying to throw any negative views on the current administration, because a lot of those folks are directly involved in the administration right now. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes, as I said before, you have to be bold in your initiatives, bold in your statement and beliefs, and sometimes you have to ruffle feathers and say, I see what you're doing, but this is wrong. In its essence, in its core, it just doesn't feel right. It just doesn't look right when you have somebody that's put in that kind of work, that kind of effort. I think the administration, being the ATF administration, would be better served in terms of continuity, in terms of rank and file morale, in terms of the organization being viewed as a fair place to work for everybody, that everyone has a chance to rise to the highest level if you were to keep him in place, as opposed to removing him without any real cause, or demoting him rather. I just don't think it's a good thing to do.
Obviously, there's been a lot of public criticism of Marvin Richardson from gun control supporters in the lead up to this decision to demote him. You had a piece in the New York Times where he was labeled as somebody who was pumping the brakes on President Biden's agenda as far as guns are concerned. And you had Newtown Action Alliance, which is one of the gun control groups, a smaller group, but they publicly spoke out attacking Richardson. Do you feel there's any validity to those complaints, that he was too close to the industry, he's too friendly to groups like the National Shooting Sports Foundation or the gun manufacturers? Is that a valid critique or a valid reason for why he was passed over and demoted, you think?
I don't think it's valid. Show me the proof. What did he do that was, quote unquote, biased to a particular industry that was definitely wrong or over the line? Show something other than saying he's overly zealously promoting firearms. I don't see that. Show me something in black and white, or all of us, we're all adults, that gives me information and proof to back up your statement. Anybody can make a statement. I can say the moon is green. Doesn't make it green.
Right. I guess the main critiques that were in that New York Times article were of the fact that he went and spoke at the National Shooting Sports Foundation's trade show, SHOT Show, in January. And then there were complaints about how long it was taking to finalize President Biden's ghost gun kit ban, which came out earlier this month.
Right.
Do you think that's unfair? I mean, obviously, ATF's been going to SHOT Show for years before.
Yeah. I just went to SHOT Show for the very first time. Mm-hmm. And you need to have a working relationship with the government for all those gun manufacturers. It's a natural conversation that has to take place anyway. Him speaking at the conference or the SHOT Show, to me, is a good thing. It says both are talking, various parties are talking to one another in a healthy, productive way. Doesn't mean he's biased. Doesn't mean he's doing his job as a government agent, as a government representative. I just see it very, very different. Are they trying to say he's not supposed to go? Is he not supposed to talk to those folks?
Certainly some of these gun control groups do really believe that there shouldn't be any sort of friendly relationship between the ATF and the industry. And that seems to be sort of a philosophical difference, because you hear a lot from people inside the ATF, at least in my experience talking to them, that it's actually, they view the relationship with the industry as vital, but but certainly the other view from gun control advocates is that the ATF doesn't do enough to, go after bad apple gun dealers and so forth. They don't strictly police the industry as much as they should. And so I guess that's the main criticism against Richardson.
Yeah, I'll even add this. I think a lot of the anti-gun, this is my untechnical statement. I think that they feel that the ATF almost in fact makes laws, but the ATF doesn't make laws. They enforce the laws. And they're watching the interaction, the ATF with these gun manufacturers, and they're just livid because they believe, I think, that there should not be even a conversation. It should be just handing down these verdicts day after day, month after month about what they can't do. And we're going to take this away from you. We're going to make it more restrictive. We're going to make it harder for folks to buy guns, to make guns, to even think about guns. And that's just not the role of the ATF, nor should it ever be. They should be an unbiased, neutral party working to represent the government in a positive way, interacting with firearm companies and those folks that represent those organizations. And I think Marvin Richardson has done a great job of doing that, if allowed to continue. So it's definitely pure politics for me. Okay,
interesting. And so it seems like the main critique you have thus far of Steve Dettelbach's nomination is this process where Marvin Richardson was not really considered and in fact was sort of punished, it seems like. Right. And so, it reminds me a bit of, one, I guess, can you just speak to whether you have concerns about Steve Dettelbach as far as any complaints of racial concerns? I just don't think he's
qualified for the position. I'll go back to Marvin Richardson in relation to him. Why would you replace somebody that has a vast wealth of information and knowledge, intimate information about how to run the agency with someone that has no information, literally coming from the outside, is a political appointee, pure and simple? Why would you want to place that person in there? As I said before, I don't think he's the devil, but he certainly is not qualified to me to be in the position. And I'll end it with this. I don't think the current administration, and I'm trying to be as neutral as possible because we are a organization that's not to the left or right. But to me, when it comes to the Second Amendment and someone attacking the Second Amendment subtly or overtly, we need to speak out. So why would you place someone in there when everyone else that was presented prior to him was truly anti-gun, be it a Chipman? I don't think the administration has veered very far from that. The person that we're looking at now, Dettelbach, is probably in the same vein, just as I said before, a wolf in sheep's clothing. A little more quieter about it, just a little more subtle, but the same end result is going to be expected from him. So I'm not with that appointment at all.
And are you basing that off of essentially his positions that he took while he was running for Attorney General back in 2018, Dettelbach?
Yeah, somewhat, but more importantly, I look at where he's coming from and who has presented him to the ATF. In other words, the current administration. Mm-hmm. I don't think they're going to place someone in there that's going to be pro-gun. They have not been pro-gun on anything that I've seen thus far. I don't think they're going to change with him being selected for the position.
Now, Dettelbach had been chosen to essentially be recommended for renomination to the U.S. Attorney in Northern District of Ohio last year by Senator Sherrod Brown out there in Ohio. He's a Democrat from Ohio. But that nomination ran into a similar, I guess, controversy where civil rights activists were unhappy with how that pick was made because effectively it was done without any sort of process to consider other candidates, especially minority candidates. And so you had Samaria Rice, who's Tamir Rice's mother, and you had a group of African-American lawyers who spoke out against Dettelbach's renomination for that position. And then apparently he was never recommended after that point. And so it seemed to have essentially sunk his chances for renomination in that case. Mm-hmm. Do you agree that there's a parallel here? And two, do you think the outcome should be the same? Do you want to see his nomination withdrawn? I
want his nomination withdrawn, and it's definitely repetition of what happened previously in Ohio. it's almost to the letter, but at a lower level within the government. You have a selection of a gentleman, Mr. Dettelbach, who is being appointed by a certain aspect of the Democratic Party, or representatives, and he's in a position where no one else is really considered of color. That in itself is very troubling. As an African American male, there needs to be a wealth of people coming in that have diverse backgrounds that need to be truly considered for the job on every level. And to me, it's like a duplication of what they did previously, but only at a higher level when it comes to the ATF. So I was against the selection of him in Ohio, and I'm definitely against the selection of him for the ATF position.
I think that makes it pretty clear. You don't want to see. I guess what would your ideal outcome be? You don't want to see Dettelbach his nomination to go through. Do you want to see Marvin Richardson put up as a permanent director?
Reinstate Marvin Richardson as the director of the ATF, not deputy director, but the director. Give him his position back. Apologize or not, it doesn't matter, as long as he has his position back, and removes Dettelbach completely from the consideration for everything. I would be satisfied with that, and that only. Do
you want to see Richardson nominated as the permanent director?
Yes, not the interim, the permanent. Yes.
Yes. Okay. I see. So you want him. That is your ultimate outcome that you'd prefer here is Dettelbach's nomination pulled. Richardson replaces him as the permanent director nominee, which you think he would get 50 votes if he was put up?
It'll be close. I would hope so. I would hope so. He get more than 50. I mean, he's, as I said before, based on what I've heard and read a lot and a lot of phone calls that I've been involved with over the last 2 weeks, he's a well-liked person and respected with the rank and file. Those are the folks that work underneath him, that report to him, black or white, male or female. So if you have that type of support, regardless of political leanings, why would you want to take him out of that position? To me, he's the ideal person to keep in the position. Continuity, morale. I think, as I said before, he's the right guy for the job. Just give him the job on a permanent basis, not interim. Interim should not be attached to his name in any way, shape, or form anymore.
Well, I think that gives us a good bottom line as far as what you guys are looking for in the ATF situation. I want to talk a little bit about permitless carry. You live in Atlanta, right?
Yeah.
Georgia just passed permitless carry, and I know that there was some confusion over your position on permitless carry. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of a platform here to talk through exactly what you and NAAGA feel about permitless carry and whether you support the policy and perhaps whatever concerns you might have about implementation or enforcement.
Officially, NAAGA is a pro-2A Second Amendment organization, and we definitely back the constitutional carry amendment or legislation that's been passed by the governor in the state of Georgia. We are a gun organization. We support anything that's going to give us more rights or easier access or path to exercise our Second Amendment rights. So we were overjoyed, very excited from an official standpoint. What was troubling to me, I had an interview. I've probably had over 700 interviews over the last 7 years. And I had an interview about 2 weeks ago with a local station. I'm not going to repeat their name. Don't want any lawsuits coming my way. And the gentleman had a very easygoing interview, asked me what I thought, told him, and nothing out of the ordinary. But when I looked at the title, and I have a process, I typically ask for the title of the piece that you're going to do, you're going to title, in my interview for or with. And also, I like to green light the final view or, summary of it before it goes out on the internet, social media. And I failed to do that. And because if I had done my normal process, I would have seen that he put for the title, pro-gun group comes out against constitutional carry in the state of Georgia. I would have put a stop on that immediately and told him to recant everything and just cancel the interview and not authorize anything. But I didn't do that. I was tired end of the day. I had an interview with a major national organization earlier in the morning and working all day. And for just a moment, for the first time in 7 years, I didn't check. And, I got bit in the butt about it. And I called the station immediately, called the managing editor and the supervisors and all that good stuff to have them change the title. They changed the title, But by that time, it was too late. Millions have seen the information. It was just all across the internet, people taking screenshots. But I want to clearly state to everyone that's listening to me right today, we are a pro Second Amendment organization. We believe in constitutional carry, always have, always will. Anytime you support constitutional carry, what you're really saying is that you embrace the reality of the Second Amendment real time. Because when you buy a gun in Georgia now, there's no delay. If you want to carry it out to go to the park, if you want to go jogging, you can buy that gun and put it on your person and feel that much safer. And this is the God's honest truth. I can't tell you, I had 3 or 4 phone calls from Black women who have said, Philip, I feel a little safer now because I can go buy a gun. I don't have to delay my security. Some of these women have been victims of domestic violence. Some of them have been robbed. Now they can have that gun with them immediately and at least have a fighting chance. So the constitutional carry fast tracks that. It allows people, men and women, to have that access to a gun that much faster. So we are total support of it. We love the implementation, and we'll definitely back that particular legislation.
Okay. And so I think the piece had noted that, there are concerns about training when training requirements are removed from, alongside the permitting requirement.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. Anytime anybody buys a gun, in our organization, we focus training and safety, and more training and more safety, more training, more safety. It's something that's the core of our organization. That's why we've never really had any issues with training our folks, because it's at the core of what we do. And when I talk to the gentleman, I let him know that, as long as folks buying these guns, they should go out and get training with that. If you do, you're going to put yourself in a much better position. The worst thing you can do is buy a gun and not get some kind of official training with a certified instructor, USCCA, NRA, whatever, or a NAAGA instructor. But that was the scope of it. We believe that's the best way to go with training. And anytime you buy a gun that you're familiar with, or anything that you're not familiar with, that gun should become a part of you, like the back of your hand. So that's what I was trying to state, and I just talked about those particular points.
Right, but you weren't saying that you oppose removing the permitting requirement.
No,
okay,
no way, shape, or form. No.
And so, obviously, a lot of people, when they talk about permitless carry or constitutional carry, one of the reasons that advocates support it is the idea of permitting requirements being inequitably applied, that many people who are charged with the crime of carrying without a permit, where that's the only crime, are often minorities, young Black men in particular. You saw this with public defenders in Detroit came out and said 97% of the arrests made for carrying without a permit, where that was the only charge, were Black men. Mm-hmm. You had public defenders in New York file a brief in the Supreme Court gun carry case, arguing effectively the same line about the inequitable enforcement of these laws. What is NAAGA's view on that as part of this effort to repeal permitting laws?
One of the things that we do at NAAGA, and we're very, very proud of, aside from physical training, one of the things that we really focus on our folks is education. Know the gun laws in your state, and they all vary from state to state for the most part. Some are identical, most are not. One thing as a gun owner, and this is a responsibility that you have, that I have as gun owners, is to know what we can and cannot do with that gun. If I am in the state of Georgia, I already know that I can open carry or conceal carry. I also know that I cannot go into a federal post office and carry, mm-hmm. or any federal parking lot. I know that because I'm made myself aware and I've read the rules and the laws. So we have to be diligent as Black folks or others to know the laws in which you need to become very, very familiar with in your particular state.
Right.
Ignorance is not an excuse to the law.
Sure. But do you agree that these laws have been traditionally enforced more heavily against Black men?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you think that permitless carry is a one of the solutions to that issue?
I think when the constitutional carry takes that whole argument and pushes it aside. You now have the right to carry the gun. And that's one of the reasons why we advocate for it and we love it, because when you buy a gun in Georgia now, if I were to buy a gun, I don't have to worry about, I got to wait 45 days, do my fingerprints, take a picture and all that other stuff. I get the right to carry my gun immediately. And that's why it's so important that Second Amendment advocates, folks like you and I, just regular folks, anytime we have an opportunity to have constitutional carry implemented in a new state, is that we push all of our efforts and collectively make sure that happens, because it avoids people getting arrested. It avoids that dilemma, do I need to carry a gun or should I carry a gun, or based on this particular state? So I think it's a good thing that we back constitutional carry in every state that we have left.
Okay. And along these lines, obviously this whole podcast has been, focused on politics, certainly gun politics, but NAAGA, I know that you guys had been really debating whether or not to even get involved in the political sphere in recent years. Should we expect to see more, political activism from your group?
One of the strengths of NAAGA, the National African Gun Association thus far, is that we have been able to attract people from both sides of the aisle, Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, Independents, because when you come to NAAGA, you're not going to be given a political speech about how to dress, how to talk, who you should vote for, none of that. You're what we call a open tent, our large tent organization. Different types of people here with different initiatives, different goals, and that's a good thing. We're going to give you a high five. We're going to give you a big hug. Having said that, people are also saying, Philip, NAAGA, things are getting so serious that we need to have a political perspective at some point. For us to do that, we would have to build another organization outside of NAAGA to have that interaction on a political level. Mm-hmm. A lot of folks, I can tell you, want to have that conversation. They want to have a vehicle where they can say, we want to politically back particular people or persons or organizations. Thus far, we don't back politicians. We back policy, such as the Second Amendment, such as social injustice, but we will not back a particular party. That's what we are officially right now. In the future, that might change. As I said before, things are getting very serious where people want to have a venue through NAAGA where they are close to NAAGA, where that policy discussion can take place at a very intimate level.
But for now, you're focused more on issue advocacy and not
Correct.
So much on political activism in the form of endorsing candidates or
correct. If it's related to the Second Amendment, we're going to speak out on it.
Okay. All right. Well, we really appreciate you coming on and giving us your time to dive into these topics and get NAAGA's point of view on what's happening here.
Sure.
I think it's very valuable. So I really genuinely appreciate it. Where can people find NAAGA if they're interested in joining or donating or supporting you?
Sure. They can go to our website at www.naaga.co. Just click on it, read information. We have a easy tab at the top. You can click on membership or donations. We'd love to have you wherever you are, wherever you're at. We have members in every state of the union. We have every type of person to join our organization, Black, white, Asian, Latino, or otherwise. We're going to give you a high five. We're going to give you a big hug and say, welcome, brother, welcome, sister. And we think that that's the way it should go.
And there's local chapters where people can join up and go shooting. And
just about in every state, there's a chapter just about. And you can connect with those folks that are like you, like-minded. They want to learn about guns. If you don't want to talk about anything else and just want to learn how to shoot, you can do just that and feel very, very comfortable. We make people feel comfortable. That's one of the goals of the organization. It's one thing to have a gun organization, but it's another thing to utilize that gun to be a rallying point to embrace people, to make them valued. And I think we do a great job in doing that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we will hopefully have you on again in the near future to talk about some more of the things that NAAGA is up to. But for now, we're going to head over to the news segment. So thank you again for being with us.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
All right. It's time for the weekly news update. How are you doing this week, Steve?
Doing all right. How are you? It's been a busy week for you out there in Colorado?
That's right. It's been busy, staying very busy, actually. But, the news is keeping us busy as well. And it's a big story that we got here from the Alec Baldwin saga. Some new information has come to light that kind of gives us a little more insight into what happened during that tragic incident on the Rust set. And you wrote a piece about it. So if you want to kind of tell us what we know now.
Yeah, well, so the police released a trove of new information, videos and interviews that they had done in the aftermath of that fatal shooting. And one of the videos in particular was very revealing, and that was the rehearsal shots of the scene that led to the fatal shooting of cinematographer Helena Hutchins on the side of Rust, and also injured the director as well with the same shot. But that they released video from that scene where they were rehearsing the Alec Baldwin drawing his gun in order to practice that scene, which I did. Now, one thing to make clear here is that I talked to the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office, and they told me that video does not include the actual fatal shot. It kind of looks like it does at the end because the camera moves and stuff, but they told me that's not from. It doesn't actually capture the fatal shooting. So that's an important thing to note. But it does give us some really significant insight into how this all played out.
Absolutely. There was a lot of stuff up in the air. He claims he never pulled the trigger initially. So I know we covered the various possibilities that can go wrong when you're using a single action gun. Maybe something struck the hammer accidentally, or there was a mechanical malfunction. But yeah, as you said, the footage of the rehearsal shows that his finger was on the trigger
right
while he was practicing on set.
And that's really the key bit. He had said that he never pulled the trigger, which, I suppose in his mind, that might be a different action than what occurred. But you can see in that video, and people can go, those listening on the podcast can go and head over to the reload.com where there's an analysis piece. It's free for everyone that includes the video that we're talking about. But you can see that when he draws his gun, his finger is clearly on the trigger of the revolver in these rehearsal shots.
Right.
And you can also see him at one point actually with his finger on the trigger, pull the hammer back and release it, which in a single action revolver, if you have that trigger depressed, and I have one here for those watching on YouTube, I have an example of a single action revolver. If you keep your finger on that trigger and you pull that hammer back and you release it, it's going to fall forward. And if there's a round in that cylinder, it's going to ignite that round.
Right.
Now this gun that I have here I've cleared personally. I've gone through and looked through the cylinder and made sure that the gun is in fact unloaded, which nobody did, of course, on that set, unfortunately. Did not do the proper checks to make sure that the gun was not loaded with live ammunition, right, which it clearly ended up being. But the issue you'll see in that video of Baldwin drawing his pistol and then with his finger on the trigger, manipulating that hammer, pulling it back and releasing it, that's going to fire a shot if there's a live round in there. And the reason that happens is because the trigger is the only thing that keeps those sears in place. If the trigger is not pulled and you cock that hammer, it's going to get caught at 3 different points on a single action revolver, including, full cock, which is where you want to fire it. There's half cock, which is where you can freely rotate the cylinder to load and unload it and check that it's clear. And then there's also a safety notch, or quarter cock, some people call it, which is engages very quickly. You can't really pull it back very far before some sort of sear engages on one of these firearms. And the difference is and it doesn't take a lot of pressure, but when you're touching that trigger, it's going to disengage all those sears and nothing is holding back that hammer. So if you pull it back and then you release it, it's going to fall forward and it's going to, if you pull it back far enough, it's going to fire around. And it certainly seems like, I don't know about you, Jake, but that certainly seems the most likely explanation for how this happened.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. We said that when we first covered the story, that of all the scenarios that could have happened, this was always the most likely thing we thought could happen. That there was just some negligence on his part, where his finger got inside the trigger guard and depressed the trigger and had a negligent discharge. For folks that aren't maybe familiar with how a single action revolver works, that was a good demonstration. Many people don't know just how easy a trigger can be pulled on a single action revolver. It's not quite like the semi-autos that most people are familiar with these days. It's a much lighter trigger. So even if he didn't intend to have his trigger in there, if he put just enough pressure, it's a pretty crisp and easy break on one of those revolvers. And you can easily have a negligent discharge if you're not careful.
And that's where there may be some disconnect in his own mind, in Alec Baldwin's mind, between pulling a trigger and just having your finger on the trigger. But in the case of a single action revolver, there's not that much difference. It doesn't take very much pressure to actually initiate that trigger. And if you're doing it before you've even cocked the gun, you're not going to probably recognize what you're doing if you don't understand how the gun works.
Sure.
Normally, if you don't have your finger on the trigger and you pull that hammer back, you're gonna feel it and hear it cock in the different sears, and then you have to pull the trigger to release it. But if you've got that trigger pressed even just a little bit, you're not going to hear anything or recognize anything as you're pulling it back, except for the cylinder turning if you go far enough. So you can see him in the video. You can see him with his finger on the trigger, pulling that hammer back and releasing it, which would fire a gun if it would set off a round if there were one in there. Now, I guess in these rehearsal shots that we have video of, there must not have been a live round at that point, but somehow a live round ended up in there, or maybe it was a mix of dummy rounds and live rounds, and he just sort of Russian roulette situation. He didn't get that live round until later when he was doing this action. But that's the only thing that really fits with what he's described and what we're seeing on that video, which is that he talked about never pulling the trigger, but he talked about cocking that hammer and releasing it. Well, pulling that hammer back, the only way that it's going to get released, if you don't, it doesn't go very far before catching that quarter cock or that safety notch. That's it's a tiny amount before you'd have to pull the trigger in order to get it to move anywhere back forward. And so his explanation fits with what we're seeing in that video in terms of it being a result of his finger being on the trigger while he manually cocks the hammer and releases it.
Yeah. And just to be clear to everyone, everything else we've covered on this scenario still stands, even though we have this new evidence of him with his finger on the trigger. There's, of course, several things down the chain where things went wrong. The fact that live ammunition was anywhere near the set is still a problem. The fact that the weapons handler on set saw him rehearsing with his finger on the trigger, that seems like someone should have said, "Hey, buddy, keep your finger off the trigger. That's part of weapons safety." So obviously several things had to go wrong beyond just what has come to light in this video. It's just that now we have a little more insight into what happened.
Right, exactly. I mean, this was the result of multiple mistakes by multiple people. That's how a tragedy like this happens, generally speaking. And, in this case, certainly there should not have been live ammunition. It's still not clear how it got on set or into that gun. And then the three people handled that gun at least before that shot was fired. The armorer who loaded it, the producer on set who was responsible for handing it to Alec Baldwin, and then Alec Baldwin himself. None of those people apparently did a proper safety check where they've opened up the cylinder of the gun and actually looked through to see if there was any ammunition in there. And then if there was, to ensure that it was actually blanks or dummy rounds. I mean, in this case, they're rehearsing a scene for B-roll, it's effectively how Alec Baldwin had described it. So there really should not have been any ammunition in there, whether it's dummy rounds or not. There's no reason to do that. But this set was clearly a set where they were rushing and cutting corners, and that led to a lot of safety violations, even beyond what happened with these guns. And then you also have the fact that somebody was standing in the line of fire while he was handling a firearm on set, which is another thing that should not have happened. You can set up a shot to where a gun is not pointed at crew. If you need to have a shot where the gun is pointed at the camera, you can still do that without getting anyone, putting anyone in danger. There's no one behind my camera, for instance, when I'm handling this gun. But none of those things were done, and it's really like it's not just Alec Baldwin's fault, right? It's not just one person's fault that this happened. We don't, there's no news on charges or anything like that yet. They're still waiting on some forensic evidence and so forth, apparently, to make final decisions on the criminal aspect of all this. But the set was fined 6 figures, the largest fine that they could receive from the state for the production company that made this movie, for all the safety violations. And then, to me, I think bottom line, the ultimate problem was complacency.
Yep.
These things happen. These safety violations happen because people get complacent about firearms safety. You see this, I'm a certified firearms instructor, and you see this all the time with people who handle guns and never have issues. Nothing's ever gone wrong to this point. I can be a little less, it's always gone the way I thought it would. So these safety rules are redundant. Maybe I don't need to follow every single one of them every time, but you realize why they're redundant when something like this happens. And Alec Baldwin talked about it at length, how he described how he would normally do things on set, which is like you just assumed or trusted that a gun he was handed was actually safe, or had the right load in it, and never decided to have that verified either by himself. And there's reasons why you might not want the actors themselves to always be the ones verifying whether the gun is set up properly or not. But
sure,
at the same time, you also can have the armorer come in and show everyone involved that the gun is set up properly. And that clearly didn't happen in this case, and could have been something that was done. Probably should be the standard practice in the industry, instead of just, I trust them to do it, I don't need to verify anything. So, that had worked for his whole career until it didn't work.
Right. And
that's the problem.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest takeaway from a tragic situation is that the rules of firearm safety just always apply. Even on a movie set, it's easy, as you said, folks can easily get complacent, especially if you're an actor. You don't think you're responsible maybe for a lot of the stuff that goes on before the shot. But yeah, the rules of firearm safety you're always responsible, even if you're, like you said, the actor who doesn't typically handle the firearm. It's not that hard to learn how to check a cylinder to see if something's loaded. It's not that hard to learn the rules of keeping your finger out of the trigger guard. This just applies to all of us, not just actors. So it's easy for things to go wrong if you get complacent, and when they do go wrong, obviously it can be a terrible situation. So
yeah, you have to have the proper respect for the guns that you're handling, even if they're blank firing prop guns. Those can be dangerous as well. And when you're inherently using guns in a more dangerous scenario like filmmaking, where you're pointing guns at people, or at least having a setup where that could be necessary for the film, then if you're going to do that, you have to follow an even stricter standard of gun safety to ensure that the gun really is unloaded. It really doesn't have live ammunition on set or in the gun, and and that you have several redundancies for a situation where a live round does get loaded into the gun, like we saw here. Well, if this shot had been set up in a way that nobody was behind, none of the crew were in the line of fire of that gun, this wouldn't have resulted in somebody's death.
Right.
So that's why like the redundancies are necessary. They were relying on the fact that no one should have live ammunition on the set, or that if it ever did make it on set, that somebody along that chain of custody would check the gun and realize that it was in there. But both of those things failed, and you could have had another redundancy in not having the crew behind that camera, which was in the line of fire for this scene, but and that would have prevented this tragedy from occurring too. But they just didn't. The first two levels of safety failed, and then they didn't do the third one. That just off the top of my head as something that's another possibility, and it resulted in somebody's death that was completely unnecessary. So it's
sad situation all around. Yeah,
it really is. And I feel for everybody involved. Alec Baldwin didn't intend to hurt anyone.
Right.
He'd done things the way he had always done them. It's just that the way things are done apparently on these sets in some cases are not safe enough, at least. So anyway, that's all we have for this week's episode. We appreciate you guys tuning in. We will be back next week with more great podcasting. And so if you want to get this podcast a day early, make sure you check out thereload.com for membership options. We've got monthly memberships. We've got a yearly membership that's effectively gives you 2 months for free. We've got lifetime memberships for people who want to go above and beyond to support our reporting. This is completely reader funded. We are an independent publication. We have no, we're not owned by some big conglomerate or whatever. All we get to run this place is the money that we receive from our readers, and so in the form of these memberships. So it's vital to our existence, and we are extremely grateful to our members, and in fact hope to have another one on the show in the near future. It's another perk you get in addition to exclusive access to dozens, hundreds of members only posts on thereload.com, and commenting privileges as well. So and we'll have to do a Q&A again soon. I think people enjoyed that last one. We'll have to set another one up soon. So we'll be in contact with our members out here to get some good questions, especially with things like the Supreme Court gun carry ruling coming up, in the midterm elections, and all this ATF stuff that we've been talking about the last couple weeks here. So look out for that in your Sunday newsletter for our members, our exclusive Sunday newsletter, and we'll be back next week.